One time, just one time, I'd like to do a video on Boeing or the FAA when they weren't conspiring to commit a crime or endanger the flying public. Seriously, I would like to do that. But no. Because every time I think they're on the verge of turning it around, they just do something more blatantly stupid. But before I get to the wrath of the NTSB towards Boeing and the FAA, we need to go back to the reason for their anger. So as some of you may or may not have heard, back in February of this year, a United Airlines Boeing Frankenmax Flight 1539, flying from the Bahamas to Newark, had just touched down and began its rollout at about 130 knots or 150 miles per hour. In case you don't know, during landing and takeoff, the main way to steer an aircraft is with its rudders, as opposed to the ailerons via the yoke or side stick while in the air. But when the MAX pilot attempted to keep the center line during his landing and rollout, the pilot tried to use the rudder foot pedals to move the rudder, but quickly found out that the pedals and the rudder were stuck. Thankfully, the incident didn't cause a serious problem because the captain was experienced enough to immediately grab the tiller, which is usually used to steer during taxiing on the ground, but in this case he used the tiller to steer the jet as it was landing at high speed, and was able to keep the airplane near the center line of the runway for about 30 seconds after touchdown, at which point the pedals and rudder began to operate normally once again. However, had this been a less experienced or aware pilot at those speeds, there could have been a serious accident. As a result of the incident, it prompted an NTSB investigation, and they released the preliminary report back in March of this year. In the report, the NTSB suggested cold temperatures may have affected part of the mechanism that moves the rudder. They said that the defect also affects the prior 737 NG models, which has an identical pedal system for rudder control. Boeing said it is aware of two similar occurrences of stuck rudder pedals on the 737 NG in 2019, saying that in those earlier incidents a component of the rudder control mechanism was replaced, and both aircraft were returned to flying. Well, I feel safer. Also in March, Boeing announced that in its latest incident, the only occurrence of a 737 MAX, Boeing said Thursday that the issue was successfully resolved with the replacement of 3 parts and the airplane was returned to service last month. Oh goody, so I guess Boeing fixed it. Well, that's the end of the video. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. No, of course, that's not the end of the video. This is Boeing we're talking about here. So also back in February, the NTSB investigators reviewed the flight data and corroborated the pilot's experience. Despite increasing force inputs to the pedals, the rudder didn't move. Also on February 9, after the incident, United took the same plane up in the air for a test flight, and it was able to duplicate the system malfunction in the air. Yeah, did you catch that detail? In the air, not on the ground. So the flight test was discontinued, but the jet landed safely. So if the 737 rudder problems sound familiar to you, well they should, because there were 2 highly publicized fatal 737 accidents in the 1990s. United Flight 585, which crashed in Colorado Springs in 1991, killing all 25 people on board, and a U.S. Air Flight 427 that crashed near Pittsburgh in 1994, also killing all 132 on board. Both those crashes occurred when a system malfunction caused the rudder control power unit to jam and the rudder to fully deflect to one side mid-flight, a condition known as rudder hardover. So you can imagine why the NTSB was quick to get involved in this later rudder failure. So back in late February, the NTSB tracked a defect to a servo motor that controls the rudder, and they tested this servo at a Collins test facility in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Collins is the manufacturer of the part. But during that test, however, they discovered that while it operated normally at room temperature, after a 1-hour cold soak, the movement of the servo's crank arm that connects to and operates the mechanism was restricted. This would prevent the rudder pedals from moving, as observed during Flight 1539 and also on the test flight. Okay, so fast forward about 8 months to the end of September last week, when the NTSB finally issued an urgent safety recommendation to Boeing and the FAA about the faulty rudder servo. The FAA said United was the only U.S. airline flying planes with the manufacturing defect in the rudder control system, and that United has already replaced the component on 9 737s, the only jets in its fleet where it was identified and faulty. However, the NTSB alert said it may cause the grounding of some 737 MAXs and older model NGs flown by foreign air carriers that have not yet replaced the defective part. In their alert, the NTSB also urged Boeing to come up with better instructions for pilots as to how to handle the rudder jams. Boeing's 737 flight manual tells pilots to overpower the jammed or restricted system using maximum force, including a combined effort of both pilots. However, the NTSB expressed concern that such force applied during landing could result in a large input to the rudder pedals and a sudden large and undesired rudder deflection that could unintentionally cause loss of control or departure from the runway. So the NTSB asked Boeing to come up with a more appropriate response besides applying maximum pedal force for such situations. Of course, Boeing said it will ensure flight crews have the appropriate operating procedures. The component that failed, the rollout guidance actuator, is made by Collins Aerospace, a unit of aerospace giant RTX, formerly known as Raytheon. In addition to being compromised by cold weather, investigators also found evidence of moisture inside the actuators. Collins later determined that a sealed bearing was incorrectly assembled during the production of the actuators, leaving the unsealed side susceptible to moisture that can freeze and limit the rudder system movement. However, the NTSB said the problem is not with the design of the component, but the misassembly at the Collins facility. Misassembly. Well, isn't that a big word for screwed up? Collins subsequently notified Boeing that it had delivered more than 353 actuators with this defect since February of 2017. For those of you into math, that was 7 years ago and 1 year before Boeing's other faulty part, the MCAS system, brought down 2 brand new Franken Max jets. Of those, 25 737 actuators originally were registered to U.S. operators, though 16 of those subsequently were leased to foreign carriers. The remaining 9 were installed on United 737s, and of course, RTX said in a statement that it is working closely with the NTSB and Boeing, and is supporting airlines operating 737s to mitigate the impact. Neither RTX nor Boeing said how many airplanes globally may still have the faulty actuator. So now, fast forward to this week and the climax of today's video. On the heels of last week's safety bulletin, the NTSB sent a letter to FAA Chief Mike Whitaker criticizing the FAA for their lack of response to the risk and Boeing for not fully informing airlines in advance about the system that had failed. In an unusually strong public rebuke, NTSB Chair Jennifer Homenday expressed concern that the FAA did not take the issue more seriously after the United Airlines 737 MAX incident in February. Homenday added that she's disappointed the FAA did not take urgent actions to address the risk of jam rudder controls after the NTSB's preliminary report on the incident was released 6 months ago. Equally concerning, Homenday said that Boeing did not provide detailed information about the component that failed to United Airlines when it delivered the 9 MAX aircraft to its fleet. Furthermore, United and its pilots were unaware that this component, an option the airline had never even ordered, was nevertheless installed and mechanically connected to the rudder. Homenday seemed to imply a parallel with how Boeing actively hid the MCAS flight control system from airlines and pilots. See, I told you. And her scathing letter continued, saying not making operators fully aware of the installed systems and equipment on the airplanes delivered to them is unacceptable and cannot continue to be tolerated. Her letter emphasized that although United had replaced the parts of its 9 MAX jets so that no airplanes flown in the U.S. are now at risk, 271 other potentially faulty parts may be installed on aircraft in service operated by at least 40 foreign air carriers. In addition, she wrote a further 75 potentially bad parts were sent directly to airlines as spares and may currently be on airplanes in service with foreign airlines. The FAA said it's moving quickly to convene a call with the affected civil aviation authorities to ensure they have the information they need from the FAA, including any recommended actions, the FAA regulator said, adding that it will conduct additional simulator testing this month. And for Boeing, well, Boeing declined to respond to questions about Homenday's letter, citing the ongoing investigation, because Boeing's got a Boeing. The rudder system that failed is only used during Cat 3B auto landings. However, United doesn't allow its pilots to do Cat 3B auto landings, only Cat 2A landings where the pilots must see the runway no lower than 100 feet above the ground. Consequently, United did not order this system. So then how exactly did these components end up on United planes they didn't order? Well, United's 9 MAX jets had initially been configured for another operator, and that when transferred to United, the actuators were electrically disabled, which Boeing claims it had noted in a 2022 service bulletin to United. On the United flight in February, even though the Cat-3B autoland system was disabled, the faulty actuator mechanically connected to the rudder jammed. That's why the rudder wouldn't move when the pilot manipulated the foot pedals. But the NTSB said Boeing failed to inform United that the 737 airplanes it had delivered to the airline were equipped with these actuators, and that the actuators were mechanically connected to the rudder control system. Moreover, only on May 6, 3 months after the United incident, did Boeing provide instructions that allowed United to permanently remove the rudder rollout guidance actuators from its 737s. The NTSB boss said, "We're concerned of the possibility that other foreign airlines are unaware of the presence of these actuators on their 737 airplanes. Consequently, their flight crews may not know what to expect if the rollout guidance actuator fails at low altitude or during landing." And finally, to wrap this story up in a nice neat bow, you're going to like this part. Hamondy's letter notes that Boeing told 737 Airlines in August that Collins had delivered more than 353 actuators with this defect since February of 2017, at which time Boeing's new CEO Kelly Ortberg was then CEO of Collins Aerospace. See, I told you you'd like that part. Almost 300 were installed on planes registered to foreign carriers, and a further 75 were delivered as spare parts to various airlines, Hamondy said. Some of these may be spares, while others may be currently on airplanes in service. But Boeing, being Boeing, of course, declined to say how many airplanes could be affected worldwide, citing the ongoing investigation, saying only that we are working with our supplier to develop additional guidance to address this potential condition. And with that, I'll let you take it from here. I want to know what you think. I always want to know what you think. But of course, I won't know until you let me know down below. And until next time, as always, yeah, this is Maximus.